Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for having me. Um, I don't know if Mike Cannon's on or not, but you got the master of disaster. Mike Cannon likes to refer to me as the Grim Reaper. So something you and I have in common there, Rich. Again, good afternoon, everyone. I want to go over since we probably would have a more elaborate 10th anniversary commemorative of Irene if this was in person. Obviously, a lot has happened since then, and the reason why we're here right now, I still want to just get a look back at how everything traversed, coming to what we expected with what happened and what we were expecting with Irene. So there we go. So the presentation is going to be more like a timeline and a review of multiple factors: National Hurricane Center forecasts. Some of the products and decision support services that we provided to all of you, and a look back at Irene's track and impacts pretty much all at once. During this presentation, I just want you to think back, go back 10 years to what you were doing during this time, and what, if anything, would you do differently knowing what eventually happened with Irene. So a brief overview: Irene ended up being the second greatest natural disaster in modern history. It's still the 1927 flood of November. That is our number one. Monetary damage from multiple articles, whatever, is generally between $750 and $1 billion in damage for Vermont. I've gotten multiple numbers on the fatalities for the state of Vermont, and somebody can correct me at some point, but I've seen anywhere from 4 to 7. I know of 4 definitely, but I used a couple articles that had 6 and 7. So it's somewhere in there. Just a little bit of climatology about landfall hurricanes in the Northeast, especially here in Vermont. Landfall hurricanes, meaning that their first landfall is in New England, generally about every 15 to 20 years. Tropical storms maybe a little bit more frequently, whether it's a direct impact across southern New England, or whether it's indirect, where it's making landfall into Carolinas before reaching the rest of New England and Vermont. But we also are known of getting remnants of tropical systems even into the Gulf of Mexico, and I think this year really showed that, especially with Ida of just 2 weeks ago, where you had a landfalling hurricane in Louisiana, and yet the remnants from that system made it all the way into the Northeast, and the devastating flash flooding and loss of life that happened in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and New York. And remember, just before that, you had Henri that produced some serious flooding in southern New England, and also Fred. So it's been rather active. Even without a direct landfalling hurricane, it has been rather active in the Northeast with these systems. So look back at the path for Irene. Irene struck New England on August 28th. It became an official tropical storm on the evening of August 20th. So it took basically 8 days from the Lesser Antilles all the way up to New England. Timeline, excuse me. On Sunday, August 21st was our first mention of Irene in our forecast discussion. First, in the lower left, you can see at the same time frame as we were putting in our discussion, the 5-day forecast from the National Hurricane Center had landfall across Florida, with it only as a tropical storm by later in that week. No cone whatsoever into New England, but of course that's only 5 days out. But we did mention that we thought that the remnants of Irene would more than likely reach the region the following Sunday. Now, on this particular Sunday, we did have a rather potent cold front that moved through the area late Sunday evening, and delivered a pretty good footprint of 1 to 2, even some local areas more than 2 inches of rainfall across south central and southern Vermont, as you can see here. And that ends up being the antecedent precursor to what ended up happening across the region during Irene. So we move ahead to August 22nd. Irene is at that point threatening Puerto Rico. We ended up putting our first, I think most of you get our what we call heads up emails. They are situational awareness emails on any uh, impactful event that's likely to impact Vermont. We issued those starting on Monday the 22nd, already started with collaboration with our state partners. On Tuesday the 23rd, we were putting various headlines on our webpage to alert the general public of what was going on. We started to issue a lot more public products. Our hazardous weather outlook was already, usually a 5-day outlook, was already issuing something about Irene within 5 days. You can see in the middle there, this is the forecast track from the National Hurricane Center on issued on Tuesday, August 23rd. And you can see the 5-day cone still has not reached New England quite yet. But if you were to extrapolate that cone, obviously the heightened awareness of what to expect. Now we move even quicker, and now it is Wednesday, August 24th. Heads up emails are continuing with increased concerns. Some of the highlights out of those heads up emails. Now we're still issuing public products highlighting things, but the direct impact, the direct communications with you folks. One quote was, I think somewhere in New England will ensure a historic flooding event from Irene. Another quote was, we feel that the track is similar enough to Floyd in 1999, where 5 to 7 inches of rain fell across Vermont. Fortunately, in 1999, we were dealing with a severe drought. So when Floyd came, there was very little flooding impacts across the region. But as we all know, 2011 was the year of water. We saw flooding all through the late winter and up until mid-May and June with a lot of rainfall. In fact, 2011 ended up being the wettest year on record for the state of Vermont. So given that we knew of those antecedent conditions, we knew that 5 to 7 inches of rainfall would not have the same impacts in 2011 as they did in 1999. So certainly we were hyping up, and this was the biggest concern. We move forward one more day. It is Thursday, August 25th. You can see that Irene now is a Category 3 hurricane. It's in the northern islands of the Bahamas. You can already see that some of the higher cloud tops, whatever, are starting to approach southeastern United States. Our heads up email, as well as a lot of collaboration calls with VEM and other partners. Certainly we're saying at this point that it is a certain impact for New England with devastating consequences expected. And I was on vacation up until actually reporting at the EOC. So this does not come from me. It comes from somebody in the office. But today's forecast is a dead ringer for the CADX exercise that was conducted just last year, some 11 months ago. So certainly with that exercise, it allowed us to prepare and know what to potentially expect with Irene. You can see from the Hurricane Center's forecast, at this point, it was looking as a major hurricane, the M there, into the Carolinas, still being a hurricane. It moves up the mid-Atlantic, and then at some point downgrading slightly to a tropical storm as it moved up the Connecticut River Valley, which again is pretty scary to what the similarities we had with CADX the year earlier. So on Friday, August 26th, pretty much the last decision day, as for most workers or most folks are working Monday through Friday, not folks that have to deal with the public safety aspects of it. But on that Friday, we issued high wind, flood watches and tropical storm watches for the area. You can see in the pink here on the forecast map, those were hurricane watches from the New Hampshire, Maine coast, wrapping around to New York City with hurricane warnings down to the Carolina, South Carolina border. The products we issued, some of the things that the headlines we had issued: Hurricane Irene will severely impact the North Country Sunday and Sunday night. A widespread significant rainfall event is expected, 3 to 5 inches in the Champlain Valley, 5 to 7 inches across eastern Vermont, with rainfall amounts of this magnitude causing widespread flash flooding across the region. We also had special web pages created, so it was one-stop shopping. So if you went to our web page, instead of clicking on 6, 7 different things to get rainfall estimates, wind estimates, whatever it may be, we were able to put together a simple one page that had all of our watches, warnings, and all the guidance needed available to everybody. Staffing was being arranged earlier for us. One of the considerations we had was working at the ELC during the event, and that ended up coming to fruition, as I'll show you here in a little bit. So with those flood watches, this is what the forecasts were based on the rainfall predictions that we and the Northeast River Forecast Center had. These were the expected crest information for the various rivers. As you can see with the purple icons, major flooding was expected across several rivers across the state of Vermont. Now, some of these did not come to fruition, whereas others exceeded it well above the forecast, including the White River there at West Hartford. But nonetheless, the indication was there that we are going to expect major flooding on the main stem rivers and significant flash flooding on the smaller subbasins across the region. So here we are the day before Irene. Just think about what
Scott, I think we lost you.
Hello, you there?
We can hear you now.
Okay, where did you lose me, Hillary, or whoever it was?
At the very beginning of the August 27th slide. The slide
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, very good. Thank you. So again, let me reiterate on the 27th, we're a day before the event. You can see that Irene has made landfall across the Carolinas. We are starting to get some of the wispy high clouds from Irene as it's moving on north. This day, we were all in the planning stages and getting ready for increased staffing with 12-hour shifts here, similar with VEM. We were also trying to plan on who was to attend and who wasn't going to be attending a wedding, as one of our co-workers was getting married and still on the afternoon and evening of the 27th. So as we were at the reception and was outside, you could see the cloud bands coming in. And I must say, probably one of the prettiest sunsets I have seen, because you get that with the clouds and with the sun setting, you get kind of a pinkish glow to the sky. Certainly things looking very nice, and who would know, or most of us knew, that within 12 hours from that point, it would be a totally different story. So again, the 4 to 7 inches of rainfall that was forecast, as you can see on this map here, and basically continued wording that the rainfalls of this amount, of this magnitude, would be causing significant flash flooding, widespread flash flooding across the region. So I'm going to go step you through some radars at different locations on the evening of Saturday the 27th and continuing through Sunday the 28th. This radar is out of Fort Dix in New Jersey. You can see the rain bands moving up across New Jersey and into Long Island, and eventually southern New England, as Irene was still south of the Delmarva Peninsula, but becoming very close. The next loop is coming out of New York City. You can see that the main rain is still down across New York City and points south, but you can see towards the end of this loop between midnight and 2 a.m., the steadier rainfall was starting to move into southern Vermont. We'll let this loop go through one more time so you can see that that occur. Here we are at midnight, 1 a.m., and then the loop ends at 2 a.m. The next loop, this is where it really encompasses and reaches the Vermont border by 8 a.m. At this point, the EOC was activated. People were coming in. I know I was driving down to be at the EOC by 7 a.m., which, as you can see right now, we're driving into the rain at 7 a.m. So the rain's just reaching the Vermont-Canadian border, but the steadier and quite heavy rain has been falling across southern Vermont, especially Bennington and Windham counties, for several hours. And that led to a quick spin up of operations at the EOC, as it wasn't shortly after that we were starting to see some significant flooding reports coming into to the EOC. So here we are on Sunday, the 28th. Again, a rainfall arriving in the Vermont-Mass border around midnight, reaching the the Canadian border between 6 and 8. Our statements, flash flood watches, we're expecting major flooding, rapid rises on waterways and streams coming out of their banks. A very dangerous flood situation was developing. Again, we were staffed at the EOC. It's the first time ever this had occurred. First experience I have had being at an EOC, other than the year before, tropical storm. Oh, I can't remember the name now. I knew that was going to happen, but I was at FEMA 1 for that event in September of 2010, just before the CADEX exercise we had. But the nice thing about it is of having staff at the EOC is we were available for impromptu meetings, whether it was planning section, whether it was the incident commander, whatnot, situational briefings we could do on call, help into the overall situational awareness for the different sections, as well as I know with the governor. And really, it was an eye-opening, and it really helped me out and the staff out as well, because it allowed me to monitor the needs of the state of Vermont and the EOC and anticipate what was needed to allow us to provide the best decision support services possible for you folks, and able to see how the operations run. So I think it was a very successful effort, and it was the first time. And since then, I've been deployed, and others have been deployed to the EOC for a major flooding event or a near miss like we had with Sandy in 2012. So this is what it looked like when the sun came up at around 7, 8 o'clock on Sunday. Satellite view, you can see the eye just right there, just outside of New York City and Long Island. Pretty impressive visible satellite picture of Irene. Again, on Irene, flash flood warnings were issued. You'll see as the radar continues to go, these green boxes are the flash flood warnings. They were issued, and you can see how they were issued from south to north. Bennington and Wyndham's first warnings were issued about 9 o'clock. Then here in Burlington, we issued for Rutland and Windsor around 9:30. Then across the central part of the state around noon, and then the rest of Vermont had flash flood warnings issued around 3 p.m. The average lead time was generally greater than 2 hours. You can see from the wording in there, flash flooding, small creeks and streams, culverts, road washouts, bridges, just an idea of what the warnings were looking like. And you can see in the top right here, the track from just outside of New York City at 8 a.m., where we already were starting to see flooding in extreme southern Vermont. 11 a.m. along in upstate New York, where we're starting to see some of the flooding closer to central Vermont. Then by 2 p.m., where flooding is occurring across much of the state of Vermont, the actual center of Irene itself is still only in Massachusetts, and eventually reaching the the Mass Vermont border and the Connecticut River Valley about 5 p.m. So here's a look at that radar from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. on Sunday the 28th. Flash flooding again begins in southern Vermont between 8 and 10, and central Vermont around midday and thereafter as you move north. Northern Vermont, not as much as central and southern Vermont with the flash flooding. And you can see by 2 p.m., the very end of this loop, whereas the rainfall was already starting to end across the Vermont Mass border. During this time, there were some evacuation notices. The city of Montpelier sent to residents that were in flood-prone areas an evacuation notice that morning. And then if we look at the radar from 2 p.m. to 8 p.m., you can see that the rain is already ending. It's still quite heavy in the northern third of the state up until about 6 o'clock. But for the most part, the rainfall is ended, but the flooding has yet to begin. Or I mean, the flooding has begun, but the worst of it in terms of the main stem rivers actually occurred when the actual rainfall had ended. So this is a loop, basically a 24-hour loop of rainfall, just so you see how it kind of in one big swoop, one big radar loop on how the rainfall moved across. And you can see the center of Irene right there moving up into the lower Hudson Valley, eventually Western Massachusetts, and then through the Connecticut River Valley. So Irene's rainfall, you can see that the yellow is greater than 5 inches. So you can see a large swath of greater than 5 inches, basically the southern half of the state, greater than 6 inches. Likewise, across the southern half of the state, especially along the eastern slopes of the Green Mountains. And then there were pockets of 7 inches or more elsewhere. And you can see from the graphic to the right, the oval representing that highest rainfall amount, and you can see it was along the spines and east of the Green Mountains that because you had southeasterly winds, so you have winds lifting up the mountain, you just triggered more precipitation potential and more rainfall across the region. So just some of the snapshot pictures of what was going on for the flooding. Again, flash flooding of streams, roads, mudslides occurred anywhere from mid-morning through the afternoon. As the flash flooding aspect started to wind down in the afternoon hours, we started to see the main stem rivers, the Mad River, the Otter Creek, the Winooski, the White River, and several other rivers started to rise significantly during the mid and late afternoon and continue into the evening of the 28th. And you can just see some of the snapshots of the flooding. This, I don't know how I'm going to describe this and do this. When I created this chart, I thought it was neat. I think it's difficult to do it virtually, but I'm going to do my best. So these are 4 snapshots of the 4 main stem rivers that had the more significant flooding across Vermont: the Otter Creek, the Mad River, the Winooski, and the White River. So what is in bold, as you see here, are rises that were, these are all measured in 3-hour intervals. What is bolded in black is any rises that were 3 feet per 3 feet within a 3-hour period. So basically a foot an hour. And then the bold blue is the approximate time and crest level for these rivers. So in southern Vermont, for example, the Otter Creek is a slower responsing river. And as you can see here, its crest didn't occur until 3 a.m. on the 29th, despite the rainfall starting in the basin around 3 a.m. on Sunday. Their greatest rises occurred between noon and 3 p.m. and noon and 6 p.m. But their crest still didn't occur until about 3 a.m. on the 29th. The Mad River, with the mountainous terrain around there, is more of a flashier river, and you can see between noon and 3 p.m. that the Mad River's gauge rose 4.8 feet. The next 3 hours, it rose 5 feet or 4.5 feet. And then the 3 hours after that rose another 5 feet. So in a period of from noon until 9 p.m., the Mad River had jumped its banks and it rose more than 14 feet. The Winooski River, similar story as the Mad. You started to see the rises really taking place around 3 p.m. and then especially between 3 and 6 p.m. with 3-foot rises for 3 hours ending at 3 p.m., then nearly 7 feet ending at 6 p.m., and then starting to go down there with a crest occurring right around 9 p.m. Again, there we saw rises of from its initial stage at 3.7 feet to its peak around 18.8. That's more than 15 feet rises. And then probably the one that surprised me and a lot of folks more because we just don't really see the White River going as hog wild as it did on this event. Generally, a lot of flooding events that we don't have any. We might have minor flooding on the White River. It's very rarely we get moderate to major, but this was definitely an exception. You see, we started at 4 feet by 3 p.m. Just between, let me step back, between noon and 3 p.m. The river rise at West Hartford was 8 feet. Now, the gauge at West Hartford is downstream. The headwaters of the White River is up like in Rochester, Hancock, those areas. So for that flood wave to rise 8 feet in a 3-hour period just tells you what kind of wall of water was coming down a rather pretty decent sized watershed. So 8 feet in a 3-hour period, 6 feet in another 3-hour period, 5 feet, so on and so forth. So we're talking about significant water coming down all our waterways. So just to get a little bit more specific on some of these. So you can see at Center Otter Creek at Center Rutland, it was the highest recorded historical crest for the Otter Creek. I believe 1927 would have surpassed that, but there was no data or no estimates of 1927. I would probably believe that 1927 would have surpassed what we had here on the Otter Creek. But no, right now it's Irene. 1938, that was the New England hurricane. This is where this is that New England hurricane that moved up across New England, moving at some 50, 60 miles an hour from southeast to northwest, cut a path right across Vermont. Still as a minimal hurricane, strong tropical storm force winds that not only brought devastating flooding, but did tremendous wind damage and actually decimated the apple crop across the state of Vermont. And that again was the 1938 hurricane. Mad River at Moretown. The gauge site is just upstream from the dam at Bridge Road intersection. I think that's where there's a farm right over just to the right of where I'm indicating here. Again, 1927 had the record crest, but 2011 was not too far away. And sure enough, third was the hurricane of 1938. But you can just see the rate of rise in here and how rapid those waters went, especially this one right here where I'm trying to bring in that middle one between 12 p.m. and 12 a.m. is 6 p.m. And you can just see how the gauge went from near 13 feet at 6 p.m. to 19 feet at around 8 p.m. A rapid, significant wall of water coming down that river. Similar with the Winooski. You can see that rapid rise taking shape and cresting in the late evening. And then the gauge broke at West Hartford. It rose so quickly, and the water in that gauge was so violent that the gauge actually broke. It wasn't until estimates by the U.S. Geological Survey afterward estimated that the river level crested at 28.4 feet, about a foot below the 1927. And once again, following the same theme was the 1938 hurricane. But just seeing these rises here of 17 feet to 21 feet in a matter of about 2 hours, and that wasn't at its peak. So significant wall of water coming down the river. I was mentioning I was at the ELC. A lot of us who are on this call right now were at the ELC, and obviously we were in the Waterbury office complex. If my memory serves me right, up until about 2 weeks prior to Irene, we were in the basement of one of the buildings. We had just moved, or you folks had just moved into the new ELC in time for Irene. A little bit of a timetable here. Just to let you know too, there is a gauge now on that bridge just to the east of the Route 100 bridge there, just east of the state complex, but there was not a gauge in 2011. So I don't have observations because we didn't have the gauge, but I've got observations from what was occurring at Montpelier, that is the MONV1 gauge, and the Mad River, which is MOOV1. But around 5 p.m. that evening, floodwaters from the Winooski started to overspread the fields on the south side of the complex. And we were projecting another 6 to 8 feet of water rising. But again, it was in the fields, hasn't really impacted anything as of yet. About an hour and a half later, flood waters had partially submerged 2 tractor trailers that were in the back lot. I believe one of them housed furniture. But again, they were just partially submerged. It was up to wheel wells, I think, at that point. And there was obviously concern, and nightfall was starting to take place by 2000 or 8 p.m. We could barely see anything. It was really dark. The waters were still going up. And at that point, one of the tractor trailers was being moved by the water. You can see from 1700 to 2000 that the Montpelier gauge had risen 4 feet. The Mad River gauge has risen from 12 to 19 feet. Less than an hour later, several roads in Waterbury had been flooded, with one remaining passable. The fire chief and others were in constant contact with the EOC. Numerous collaboration calls with other officials on what to do or where to go for a backup EOC if you needed to be evacuated. And eventually at around 21:30, the evacuation order was given, and we moved over to where FEMA had a post due to the earlier flooding that they had a joint field office due to the earlier flooding that we had in 2011. So that gives you a time frame on how rapidly things escalated during the evening there in Waterbury. We are hoping to take this data here between the Montpelier gauge and the Mad River gauge, and trying to use that in forecasting future stages for Waterbury itself if we were to have an event like this. And the Northeast River Forecast Center is doing that for us as well. So the flood aftermath, I think you've seen all these pictures. Not only was it infrastructure and personal homes and whatever, it was during crop season, so during the harvest season. So a lot of crops and all the year's work planning and getting the crops ready were gone due to the event. Again, the presidential disaster declaration that was declared. The highest impact areas of the flooding, these are just some of it, but the greatest impacts are largely across northern or basically Rutland, Windsor, and points south, especially on those east-facing communities is where the largest impacts had occurred. Again, it was due to abnormally wet conditions. The diagram on your right shows that the antecedent conditions, we were very wet to extremely wet prior to the event. Of course, the rainfall that we had the week prior didn't help matters. The lower right shows the same thing, that the blues are where conditions were very high on the rivers. And then again, on the left, you can see the actual track with the rainfall amounts. So in summary, again, Irene's the second greatest natural disaster to affect Vermont. Rainfall rates of more than 1 inch per hour occurred. I think rainfall rates might have gotten up to 2 inches an hour for a very short time, but largely 1 inch per hour, unlike what happened with Ida in the New York area, where they actually had 3 inch or more per rainfall rates. Considerable flash flooding obviously occurred major record-breaking main stem flooding, especially across central and southern Vermont. All these rivers that are gauged in Vermont that were in red are new records. Some of them 100-year interval occurrences, some 50-year reoccurrence intervals. And lastly, here was the forecast for the 2021 Atlantic hurricane season with the update on August 4th. 15 to 21 named storms as of Nicholas. That brought us to 13. So we still have a lot of the season to go. 5 hurricanes. That includes Nicholas, as Nicholas was upgraded to a hurricane just before landfall last night. 2 major hurricanes. The upper right shows, whoops, my apologies for that. The upper right shows what's out there right now. There is a disturbed system out around the Bahamas that over the course of the next 5 to 7 days may be tropical, may not. The interest on this one right now, there's no direct expected impacts for Vermont, but we may have to monitor that one. Not so much it would be a significant impact, but several computer models have this thing hanging around until the middle or end of next week, where it kind of whatever possibly forms or doesn't form moves up, kind of does a loop between New England and Bermuda, and then just kind of sits and stays there. So we will have to just see how that plays out. And then there's a much more stronger system that's coming off of Africa right now that we'll just have to watch as it's in the historical area for storms that travel from Africa. And you can see in the bottom right here the time frame of the peak tropical season for the Atlantic, and you can see the peak season is September 10th. Here we are today on the 14th. We're slightly going down, but there's a long way to go before we get to the end of the season. And the links here are just some of the various links that are available to you from either the Hurricane Center, our office, Albany's office, or the Northeast River Forecast Center.